2 years, of a historic tribe called the Mdewakanton Sioux of Minnesota. He calls himself Cermak. His grandfather, John E. Cermak, was one of the 12 original founders, member of the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community in 1969. When the community gained federal recognition, from 1860s till present day, his family holds tribal trust land, where his lineage was born on, thus the community of Dakota Sioux farmers. Damon is the direct descendant from the lineage of Chief Big Thunder, who signed treaties with the U.S. government in 1830 and 1837. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Damon Knight.
So, I guess I'll start off with who I am. I am Damon Aaron Knight, direct descendant of Chief Big Thunder. I grew up in Bloomington, Minnesota, as well as farming our family land that is located in New Prague, Minnesota. At the time when the land was issued, the state of Minnesota was not even a United State. So I love speaking, and when I started speaking was in high school because I wanted my student body and my teachers to recognize what we are present day rather than what's taught in history books. All my life I feel I wasn't asked racist questions, but just ignorant and understanding of what we are present day. Being involved with the Dakota War against the United States, many of our members were exiled and hung, 38 warriors, and many of the Sioux were outlawed out of Minnesota. But then there was 200 families, and I descend from one, that are called the loyal Mdewakanton. And these were the people that saved white settlers from New Ulm all the way to St. Paul and let them know about the war that was going to come and to hide for safety and so forth. So with that history being said, we're now participants in the economy, the United States economy, and we develop mass infrastructure within our tribal lands. And it is an honor position to be here because what we're forming now is a treaty council that I'm one of the leaders of. And through passion, through stories my grandfather told me and other tribal members, I started speaking and advocating for my tribe, taking the position as a young tribal leader. Despite age, I've been dealing with the Department of Interior on many land issues and Native American rights and activism, and following the shoes of my grandfathers who were Dakota farmers that were westernized into the society today. So it's great to be here again, and just to talk about my family history, because once you know your history, you truly know yourself. So for me to be in this position today, a lot of family history had to be researched through elders, the Historic Society, and other records I've collected from Washington, D.C. And with these records, there are not many of my people left, 3,700 people, not counting the enrolled members in the 3 Mdewakanton communities today. And it's important to know the 3 Mdewakanton communities of Lower Sioux, Prairie Island, and Shakopee all are the foundation of the Minnesota Mdewakanton lands that were issued after the Dakota War, when our treaties were then canceled due to the war. The war started for many issues. One was our people were starving, and the chiefs, after every signing, they lived really good. There's a lot of records of my family getting a lot of land and treaty payments, and up to 650 acres my family inherited throughout history since the 1860s. And Grandpa John, who was an original founder of Shakopee, farms what today is now Mystic Lake and the 50 acres surrounding that land. So it's always neat to let people know that when you come to our casinos or when you come to our reservations, there was a lot that happened before to even establish that. So it's an honor to be able to represent that and be a descendant of that. And I take great history in the history, I take great pride in the history and the genealogy aspect of it. Something that our people has lacked due to white hostility. Our women were marrying French Canadians and other European settlers to avoid harassment for being part Indian. So a lot of our cultural, traditional way of life has been threatened through many generations. And it's great to meet Happy, who stands for the culture and the language and preserving the traditional songs that we once sang before white interaction. So it's an interesting story because, of course, everybody wants to know where they come from and what they want to do with their life when they get out of high school. I did not attend college after high school. I devoted my life to the tribal politics and the history and the government-to-government relationship we have with the Department of Interior in the United States. I'm a descendant of the oldest pioneer, Abel Moran, who was a French-Canadian fur trader who came from Quebec, Canada, all the way down and even befriending Sibley, General Sibley, as a friend and built his house in Mdewakanton. With that being said, during treaty negotiations of the 1830s and the acts of Congress throughout the 50s and 60s and even to the 1700s, my family participated in. So a lot of this knowledge is what we speak today and what you cannot find in a museum because our culture has been manipulated and twisted for multiple reasons. But as the oldest pioneer, he met a full-blooded Dakota woman named Angeline Moran. Well, Moran when she got married. She was the daughter of Chief Big Thunder, where their village was modern-day St. Paul, Pig's Eye, Minnesota, what we call the Capocha. With that being said, a lot of French-Canadian men found the benefit of making children with the full-blooded women for the reasoning that their children and heirs will forever inherit land patents that we have not recovered mass acres of it to this present day. And I'll talk about the reasoning why and what I do for a living with that being said. But from 1875, we sought out from St. Paul to Wheatland, Minnesota, also known as New Prague, great farming community. We had a homestead. We built homes with the timber of that land and farmed it and preserved it to this very present day. So over 100 years of maintaining land that was issued to us. And then during the 1880s, because of the war in 1860, the treaty land that my family lives on, a lot of those lands were voided for a lot of people. We have a lot of people coming back to the state of Minnesota because of the war and fleeing the state for many reasons, like I said earlier. But there was the group of the Friendly Sioux, also known as the Loyal, that were getting appropriated land through Congress in the 1800s. And families that lived and farmed this land all the way into the present day communities of the Lower Sioux Indian community of 1934, the Prairie Island Indian community of 1936, and then later on, 1969, my grandfather was one of the 12 original founders of the Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux community. I am not an enrolled member with the Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux community, but with the treaty council that we are now forming and working closely with many lineal descendants of these communities, we are now exercising our treaty rights and becoming IRA communities and transferring back to our traditional way of life. For many years, our lands have been used in Minnesota, even such as the property of Dunwoody and the treaty land that was sold was not given to my people. So then I go into treaty events from 1805, 1825, 1830, 1837, then in 1851, 54, and then in 1858. Those were all of the treaty signings that my people participated in to establish what we have today, the United States of America, Minnesota. And with those treaty events, there was money put into an account. And this money was not paid for many years, and litigation through the early 19th century happened because the treaties were canceled for a group of Mdewakanton, but there's a group of the loyal Mdewakanton who were given land and farming equipment to sustain themselves and to practice self-determination on. But we have this group of people with this land, and the treaty payments have not been issued. So then in 1925, a tax-free payment of only $129 was given to the individual members. And this was during the Great Depression, and then in 1934 is when the Indian Reorganization Act happened, and that's for Indian communities to gain federal recognition, and the power of our communities now lie with the Secretary of Interior. At the time, it sounded good. They gave us bylaws and a constitution that we signed and organized underneath. And as years go on, there was still litigation for how we were going to distribute the treaty payments. Well, in 1972, there was a list prepared with the lineal descendants of the Mdewakanton Wapakude lineal descendants who descend from historic treaty signers, and that in 1967, Indian Claims Commission was saying these people who are not members of these IRA communities, they will receive an interest payment from the docket 363, which is 1 out of 5 accounts that the money towards our treaty signings went into. Then during the 80s, in the middle of the 80s, an act came out in 1985 where, well, now we want to pay out the treaty money, but how can we have the United States government profit from this? Because we realize that we have tax-free land and tax-free money, and if we were to develop our land with infrastructure and become America as America's growing around us, just in our local communities, how we will participate in that. So that's when the Gaming Act for casinos in 1988 came about. But in 1985, there was a judgment fund summary for how to properly enroll members from that 1972 list to be able to become members in these 3 communities, to manage their money, the governing bodies, to be able to create social programs, education programs, health programs, religious programs, economic programs. And they wanted to do this, and this is the purpose for the 1934 Act. Well, what happened was in 1992 is when the construction of Little Six was already established, but then Mystic Lake Casino in 1992 and opened in 1994. So it's important to understand that when we have tribal trust lands, how are we supposed to develop land when we can't get a loan from a bank? And that was one issue that we had because of our tribal land and the sovereignty that comes with it. But with the Gaming Act was a way where there's a federal tax for casino gaming on these tribal lands, and that the money from the treaties is what funded for the Treasure Island Resort and Casino, Jackpot and Junction, and the Mystic Lake Casino. So the treaties is what established for our people to have more of a freedom and escape poverty that once was just 20 years ago from trailers to now the success we have in the communities today. So that's something I like sharing with people, is that it's an artifact that are not shown present day. And that song that Papes was just singing was one example where that's not in the schools. You know, the schools, public schools don't offer programs to for our children to learn their language or song or any other people of the state of Minnesota to be able to learn. And we feel that we need to tell our story because with these lands, our tribal councils are now taking jurisdiction of them. And it was meant for the individual, the head of the family, to live on these lands, and their heirs are entitled to immediate possession of these lands, which are now not only threatened by the United States, but by these 3 IRA communities that we speak of. So I've been working on a federal acknowledgement project with Dakota elders so we can establish what was set forth in treaties and acts of Congress, because our whole history ever since the Dakota Uprising War has just been everywhere. And it's neat to be able to have a treaty council now, because Minnesota Mdewakanton never had a leader since and after the Dakota Uprising War. So we were able to gather a year ago where we worked together. And it's really a neat thing when you show somebody land that was issued to their ancestor and then recovering it for them. So, and also meeting with the governor and the Secretary of Interior, and now our rights are being heard, and it was already established. So I make YouTube videos on a lot of these topics, and that's how I got found to speak here today. One of my elders was like, yeah, I know a young man from Shakopee, you know, he'll come by and talk, and there was no hesitation to be able to come here for this, because any event that gives us the platform to let our story be known is well used, and we're thankful for your guys' presence, because the state is fairly new in 1858, so a lot has been developed and a lot of our story has been lost. But we're now working on a lot of things going on, and I like to always speak from the Minnesota Mdewakanton perspective, because we're more than just the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, the Prairie Island Indian community, and the Lower Sioux Indian community. These were just groups of people who formed a community together based on their lineage. So it's always an issue when you're governed by another nationality or the United States government and dealing with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and rules that they set that aren't under acts of Congress managing our land and our well-beings. But there's a lot of programs we're setting up for the children to be able to preserve this history and give them the source to be able to carry on what we started, which are these casinos and mass infrastructure that was developed. So it all really, for me, why I take great pride in this is because my grandfather always talked about being Dakota farmers and us actually teaching a lot of homesteaders in Minnesota our growing ways. Again, this was a new continent for them, so their soil from Europe is different from here. So to have the lineage that impacts agricultural growth just here in Minnesota stems from the Dakota farmers and our knowledge and our wisdom that was given to many farmers, even for the racism that we've gotten throughout the years. And with my family, what we have today is so sacred because it was the start of a generation of the mixed and half-bloods. And to be identified as a mixed blood or half-blood, that's almost saying that we were half of a human being or mixed blood of a human being. And our people were never acknowledged in their rights civilly as voting members. We became U.S. citizens in 1925. And I noticed that because right after the treaty payment, the government recognized, well, we can't tax someone who's not a citizen, so we're gonna make them a citizen, so when we pay out our treaty money, we get it back in some way, or any norms possible, because we are a threat with our locations. That's why Mystic Lake Casino is the best and the most thriving Native American owned casino in the world, was because of our location. And just to think that one fund from our treaties, 20% of one fund from our treaties established that, really can, now when you guys go play, and hopefully don't lose too much money there, and start blaming us that we owe you, and dang it, I just lost this much money, and we lost our whole norm and traditional way of life. And casinos was a way that we took advantage of to be able to become, I wouldn't say wealthy, but to take us out of poverty. Again, 20 years ago, it was mostly trailer homes and dirt roads. And when you tell the kids that, or when you tell somebody that, they only see the Mystic Lake lights and the casino and what they're doing now and the donations that they make. But, I'm always the one person that always says that gaming's not our inherited right, but to practice and manage our treaty accounts is a birthright and a sovereign right. So with the decision of the casinos was a way where I say that's the government saying, well, you can have an enterprise and be a community that is around surrounding communities to employ, and we employ many people, we give many jobs. Our communities promote jobs for the community members and the outside surrounding community members. So us being in the United States, in the state of Minnesota, I would like for people to know that we are a separate nation within the nation of America, and what we've established is quite impressive, and it only started from 12 people. And 12 people put their heads together, and they had children, and many children. So the community of Shakopee, I believe, was around 340 members, 60 members. Prairie Islands, 530 members. And Lower Sioux is 930 members, I believe. And then there's a list, a census roll that was just released publicly in 2017 of 3,700 people who aren't enrolled. So when you look at this group of people to how many thousands of us that were here, we're almost extinct. And so when I spoke, I went to Cretin-Durham Hall High School, and I was one, I believe, in the 2% who didn't go to college after high school. Usually at Cretin-Durham Hall, you're going to play sports or you're going to further your education through a university. But I felt that I needed to learn my knowledge, my self-knowledge, and my tribe history, because a lot of these acts of Congress and this history isn't taught in university. So even with tribal nations or tribal programs that universities have today, is a lot on modern day Indian law to make it where what happened in the past doesn't exist no more. So that's where I just meet elders all through the days and for hours and hours, and each time you meet an elder, they share more wisdom. And it got to the point where 7 years now, we're pretty fed up with what was established to our ancestors, these Minnesota Mdewakanton lands, also known as Indian land certificates, now just being known for our business success. And the problems we have in our communities, resulting in this success has also been a damage for our people. And so one that would risk a college education, I am looking forward to eventually going back to school after this treaty council is formed. But that's so we can learn the laws and we can protect ourselves. Because lawyers that we hire nowadays aren't taught our laws. So a lot of the times I'll tell you a story about a lawsuit in 2003 all the way into 2012 where our tribe was issued 12 square miles along the Minnesota River. And that was for the friendly Sioux who did not participate in the Dakota Uprising War. Well, Elder Wolfchild, he started a lawsuit saying, well, all these people on this 12 square miles need to get up, pack their bags, they need to get out of here. And farmers who passed their land down through generations, they need to get out of here. And the Judge Leto, who was a federal judge in that court ruling, he did acknowledge us as a separate band, and we are recognized not by Shakopee, Lower Sioux, or Prairie Island, but actually as an individual nation itself. Now, to be realistic, to ask families to move off our 12 square miles, the court did not favor, where we're now trying to either come up with a lease payment from this 12 miles or issue out scripts of land of 80 acres to the heads of families. That was awarded to us through an act of Congress. There was many acts of Congress that issued out land. Yes.
As well, and you are a direct descendant of Big Thunder.
Yes.
But I'm just curious about becoming a leader. Do you have siblings? How were you chosen?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad that you asked, because it was a lot of frustration. My grandfather, he died when I was 15. And one thing he said to me was to carry on the family history and the tribal history and look into it. He always talked about it, but he never talked about it from a political standpoint. It was just either camping up north or on his tractor in the field talking about, go grab that soil, this is your country. So the tribal leader part started, our land that we held since 1944, all the way into Grandpa John's death in 1989. Then Uncle Ed took the land over, and this is the land where Mystic Lake's located. So in 1992, Ed takes it over 3 years after, until his death. What happened to our family is that we've been farming this land all of this time. But with tribal governments forming and councils making decisions of land that was established before even the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community in 1969, they felt that it was their right to cancel our title of land, which went back to, the title went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and then the Bureau of Indian Affairs transferring the title to the community. So we lost out on land that we farmed for decades. So with that being said, a lot of my family, the land that they were born on, not in a hospital, was lost by a community that we started. People that were from other families, because these communities consist of multiple families. We're related in a way through distant cousin or some sort, but some of us, there's a lot of families. So our family lost out on our land. And with that being said, I always, we had a lawsuit in 1996 against the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community for the land takings. And ever since, because I was born in 96, it was always just a family rumor. When are we going to get the land back? When are we going to get membership in the community? We still have land that the family holds. Our cousin Ray Moran right now has the title to. How are we going to get this land back? And with my grandpa being one of the leaders of our family and dying, the family was at I feel a standstill. You know, our leader's gone. You know, we have uncles stepping up, trying to represent ourselves, lawyers. I can't say, as 100% certainty, but we're paid off by these casino tribes to hush the idea that their family land was taken. So I've been online, and I've always studied, and at Creed-Durham Hall even, it was interesting, because you'd think I need to be at football practice, but I'm in the library reading my own history, and not, you know, the homework, and nothing mattered to me. It became an obsession to the point where I just talk about it all the time, about how these communities were started, our land that we once had is now lost, and our family only continues growing larger, and we need more land for our family, and it's been a family problem. But then as social media comes about and becomes more popular, not only did I find out that my family from a Mdewakanton community was rooked out of land, there's families from Lower Sioux and Prairie Island where they had land before the community was federally recognized, but now being lost by this taken from this federally recognized community. And so, you know, after years of our elders making websites or any platforms we have that we share our knowledge, and I've always watched, but then during Trump's election, it was funny, I wouldn't say he inspired me, but the way he would speak was a way where I would used to speak in high school, not in the inappropriate terms, I'll hold this against me, but just in a way where he was one of the original founding, you know, I wouldn't say founding fathers, but his family held land since the 1700s, and to see what he did with it, Trump Towers, land that was his family's, passed down. I learned that he was issued a land patent like my tribe. It kind of gave me a spark to, we can become more than farmers and become entrepreneurs. I have my insurance license, I work for State Farm. And so, and I always thought about doing real estate too. But then to think that our tribe owns land and we can develop it if we organize and become a treaty council, we can get the funding to develop infrastructure on our lands even more at a rate that we already are. So I finally started making videos on YouTube and my personal